Chapter 4. The Lighthouse. Adrian Moore stood at the edge of town, staring up at the looming silhouette of the lighthouse. It rose high above the jagged cliffs, a dark sentinel against the gray, swirling sky. The structure was ancient, its weather-beaten stone walls scarred by years of exposure to the harsh coastal elements. The once bright beacon, which had guided ships through treacherous waters, was long extinguished, leaving only a hollow tower, silent and forgotten. But Adrian couldn't shake the feeling that the lighthouse was anything but abandoned. It had come up in his investigation several times now, always mentioned in hushed tones or half-finished sentences. Father Ellison had glanced nervously in its direction when Adrian had pressed him about the disappearances, and the shopkeeper had gone pale when asked about the town's history. Even the strange woman from the previous day had seemed to steer her path deliberately away from the cliffs, avoiding the lighthouse as though it were cursed. If there were answers to be found, Adrian was certain that the lighthouse was key. The wind whipped around him as he made his way up the steep, crumbling path that led from the town to the cliffs. The salty air stung his eyes, and the sound of the sea crashing against the rocks below filled his ears, louder and more insistent than ever. It wasn't just the sound of waves, though it was deeper, almost rhythmic, as if something beneath the water was moving in time with the tide, something vast and ancient. As he climbed higher, the ground became rougher, and the path narrower. The landscape around him shifted. Where once there had been sparse patches of grass and rock, there was now only the hard, gray stone of the cliffs, jagged and uneven. The sea was an ever-present roar in the background, filling the air with a low, ominous hum. The lighthouse itself stood at the very edge of the cliff, a monolithic structure that seemed to rise out of the rock itself. Up close, Adrian could see the intricate carvings etched into its base symbols that looked older than the lighthouse, older than Ashwick. They were worn smooth by time, but something about them unsettled him. They were too precise, too deliberate to be mere decoration. The symbols curled and twisted in unnatural patterns, forming shapes that made Adrian's skin crawl the longer he stared at them. He touched one of the carvings, feeling the rough stone beneath his fingertips. The symbol seemed to pulse faintly, as though it held some long-forgotten power, waiting to be unleashed. Adrian shook off the feeling and stepped toward the heavy wooden door at the base of the lighthouse. It was old, its surface scarred and weathered, but when he pushed, it swung open with a low creak, revealing a spiral staircase that led up into the tower. Inside, the air was cold and damp, carrying the sharp, metallic scent of rust and salt. The sound of the wind outside was muffled, replaced by the hollow echoes of his footsteps on the stone stairs. As Adrian ascended, the narrow windows in the walls provided brief glimpses of the sea below, each one revealing the vast, churning water that stretched out endlessly to the horizon. The staircase wound higher and higher, leading him deep into the heart of the tower. The walls were covered in more of the strange symbols he had seen outside, though these were fresher, their lines sharper and more defined. Some looked like they had been carved recently, and Adrian could feel their presence like a weight pressing down on him, growing heavier with every step. About halfway up, he came to a small landing. A narrow hallway stretched out before him, dimly lit by a single flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. The hallway was lined with old, rusted doors, each one numbered and faded, peeling paint. It looked like the lighthouse had once housed living quarters for the keepers who had maintained the light, though those days were long past. Adrian approached one of the doors, its number barely visible beneath the layers of grime. The handle was cold and stiff, but it turned with a groan of protest. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was small, no more than a few feet across, with a single cot pushed up against one wall and a narrow table in the corner. The air inside was stale, filled with the musty scent of neglect, and the floor was covered in dust. But it was the walls that caught Adrian's attention. They were covered in drawings, dozens of them, scrawled in frantic, uneven lines. The drawings were crude, but their meaning was clear. They depicted the sea, vast and endless, with strange, tentacled creatures rising from the depths. Some of the drawings showed figures, human figures, standing at the edge of the cliffs, their arms raised toward the sky, as if in worship. Others showed the lighthouse itself, but distorted, twisted into unnatural shapes, with dark tendrils snaking out from its base and reaching into the sea. Adrian's heart pounded in his chest as he examined the drawings. These weren't the idle scribblings of a bored lighthouse keeper. They were messages, warnings. Whoever had drawn these had been terrified, driven to the brink of madness by what they had seen. In the corner of the room, Adrian spotted an old journal, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. He picked it up carefully, flipping through the entries. The handwriting was shaky, barely legible in places, but as he read, the words chilled him to the core. June 12th. The sea calls to me again. I hear it in my dreams, its voice deep and full of secrets. I cannot ignore it any longer. The others are afraid, but I must know the truth. What lies beneath the waves, what waits in the deep. I can feel it watching me even now as I write this. June 18th. I went to the cliffs last night. The sea was so close I could feel its pull. Something stirred beneath the water, something massive. I saw it just for a moment. It was there and then it was gone, swallowed by the darkness. But I know it's real. I can feel it. June 25th. I'm not alone. Others have heard it too. They come to the cliffs just like I did, drawn by the same call. We stand there together, staring out at the sea, waiting for something. I don't know what, but it's coming. It's coming for all of us. July 3rd. The town knows. They don't speak of it, but they know. They've always known. This has happened before many times, but they refuse to acknowledge it. They think they can keep it at bay, but they're wrong. It will come for them too in time. The sea doesn't forget. The deep one doesn't forget. July 8th. I saw it again. This time it rose higher, closer. It's watching us, waiting. The others say we should leave, but I can't. I need to understand. I need to know what it wants. The lighthouse is the key. It always has been. Adrian closed the journal, his fingers trembling slightly. The entries were fragmented, the ramblings of a mind unraveling under the weight of some unseen horror. But they were clear enough to confirm what Adrian had suspected. The disappearances were linked to the sea, and the townspeople knew far more than they were letting on. The journal's final entry sent a chill through him. The lighthouse is the key. What had the keeper meant by that? What did the lighthouse have to do with the sea, with the creatures that lurked beneath its surface? Adrian left the room, his mind racing with questions. He continued up the spiral staircase, his footsteps quickening as he reached the top of the lighthouse. The beacon room was dark, its windows caked with salt and grime. The massive glass lens that had once cast its light across the sea was cracked and covered in dust, long forgotten. But there was something else here, something that didn't belong. In the center of the room, beneath the broken beacon, was an altar. It was small, barely more than a slab of stone, but it was covered in the same strange symbols that had been carved into the walls below. Candles, long since burned out, surrounded the altar, their wax dripped and hardened on the floor, and at the center of the altar lay something wrapped in cloth, its shape indistinct but unsettling. Adrian approached cautiously, his breath coming in shallow, controlled bursts. He reached out and pulled back the cloth. What lay beneath was a carved figure, crudely made from driftwood and stone. It depicted a creature part man, part something else entirely. Its body was twisted, its limbs too long, its face distorted and featureless. From its back sprouted a mass of tentacles, reaching out in all directions as though they were trying to grasp something just beyond their reach. Adrian recoiled, his pulse quickening. The figure was unmistakably connected to the drawings in the lighthouse keeper's room, to the deep one the priest had spoken of. Whatever this thing was, it was a representation, an idol of something far worse, something that was far from human. And then he heard it. A sound, low and distant, rising from the depths of the sea. It wasn't the crash of the waves against the cliffs, nor the howl of the wind. It was something deeper, more primal. A hum, like the breath of some great beast slumbering beneath the water, waiting. The lighthouse shuddered just for a moment, as if in response to the sound. Adrian's heart pounded in his chest as he backed away from the altar, his mind racing. The town wasn't just hiding something, it was worshipping it. Whatever the sea had taken, whatever the townsfolk had been offering, it wasn't over. It was only just beginning.